It is over for Kash Patel. What happened inside the corridors of FBI headquarters over the last 48 hours didn't just shake Washington. It detonated a bomb at the very foundation of American national security. And the shockwave is still spreading. Nobody in the intelligence community saw this coming. Not with this level of precision, not with this timing, not with this degree of calculated surgical destruction, aimed directly at the people who knew the most dangerous secrets about the most powerful man in the country. The walls are not closing in on Kash Patel. They have already closed. And the only question left, the only question that matters right now, is how many people go down with him. Here is what we know. Congressional leaders, spearheaded by Representative Grace Ming, have launched a formal investigation into FBI Director Kash Patel. Not a hearing request, not a letter of concern, a formal subpoenaed congressional investigation targeting the sitting director of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. And the reason that has 20-year intelligence veterans making phone calls from parking garages at 2 in the morning is what Patel did in the shadows of the last 2 weeks. He didn't reorganize. He didn't restructure. He reached into the most elite, most classified, most operationally irreplaceable counterintelligence unit in the entire Bureau. A division designated CI-12, the FBI's top Middle East counterintelligence apparatus. And he pulled every single agent out by the roots. A mass firing, sudden, coordinated, and executed with a precision that intelligence professionals are now calling the signature of a man who knew exactly what he was destroying and chose to destroy it anyway. Think about the timing, because the timing is everything in this story, and the media is not giving it the weight it deserves. The moment U.S. forces began moving into high alert postures across the Middle East, the moment carrier strike groups repositioned, and the Pentagon started briefing the White House on escalation scenarios, the exact same moment. The agents who had spent years mapping Iran's intelligence networks inside American borders. The agents who understood Hezbollah's financial infrastructure from the inside. The agents who could identify a hostile foreign operative walking off a plane at Dulles Airport. Those agents were being handed termination letters, not reassigned to other divisions, not offered early retirement, fired, clearances suspended, institutional knowledge boxed up and walked out the door. And the country they had spent their careers protecting was left staring into a strategic void at precisely the moment it could least afford to. Sources inside the Bureau, people who have given decades to this work, people who have survived every political storm and every bureaucratic purge Washington has thrown at the intelligence community, are describing the atmosphere at FBI headquarters right now in terms that should alarm every American, regardless of party. Veterans who never panic are panicking. Senior officials who have operated through genuine national security crisis are telling colleagues in private that what Patel just executed is something categorically different from anything they have witnessed in their careers. Because the threat this time is not coming from a foreign adversary. It is not coming from a hostile state actor or a terrorist network or a sophisticated cyber operation. The threat is coming from the director's own office. And when the threat comes from inside the building, there is no protocol. There is no response plan. There is only exposure. But here is the detail, the single devastating detail that transforms this from a controversial personnel decision into something that career prosecutors are now examining with extreme interest. Every single agent Kash Patel fired from CI-12 had previously worked on the investigation into Donald Trump's handling of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Not most of them, not a significant portion, every single one. These were not random names selected from a department-wide performance review. These were not agents caught up in a broad ideological sweep of the Bureau. These were the exact individuals who had touched, processed, cataloged, analyzed, and in some cases testified about the classified materials found in that Florida storage room. The agents who could still connect evidentiary dots that prosecutors haven't fully mapped. The agents whose institutional memory of that investigation represented a direct living threat to anyone who wanted that case to stay buried. And Kash Patel, the man Donald Trump personally hand-selected and fought to install at the top of the FBI over the objections of virtually every senior intelligence official in the country, erased them in a single coordinated action, days before America moved toward war. Let that settle for a moment, because the question now consuming every senior lawmaker, every intelligence official, and every constitutional scholar in Washington is identical. Was this a purge to protect the president from the consequences of a federal investigation? Or was it something even more dangerous? A deliberate, premeditated decision to leave the United States operationally blind to Middle Eastern threats at the exact moment those threats became most acute, so that no institutional memory would remain to connect future intelligence failures back to the documents at Mar-a-Lago. Both possibilities are catastrophic. Both possibilities are now under active congressional investigation, and Kash Patel has no clean answer to either one. Representative Grace Meng is not raising these questions as political theater. She is raising them in writing on official congressional letterhead, with the full weight of subpoena authority behind every single word. And her investigation is not operating in isolation. Sources on Capitol Hill confirm that multiple committee chairs are now coordinating their efforts, sharing documents, cross-referencing personnel timelines, building a composite picture of exactly when Patel issued the termination orders versus when the military escalation orders were issued by the Pentagon. And the picture that is emerging from that timeline is, according to one senior congressional staffer who spoke on Background last night, not ambiguous. The firings did not happen after the military buildup became public. They did not happen simultaneously with the escalation announcement. They happened before. Patel moved against CI-12 while the Middle East operation was still classified, which means, and this point cannot be overstated, whoever authorized these firings had advanced knowledge of the military escalation. They knew what was coming. And they chose that exact window to eliminate the country's Middle East intelligence capability. Anyway, now let's talk about what CI-12 actually represented, because the coverage of this story is treating it as an acronym, when it was something far more significant. The FBI's Middle East Counterintelligence Division was not a general-purpose analytical unit. These were not desk agents processing open-source intelligence reports. CI-12 was the Bureau's most specialized, most operationally embedded team focused on state-sponsored espionage, foreign asset recruitment, hostile intelligence penetration, and threat interdiction specifically tied to Iran, its proxy networks, and affiliated state actors. These agents ran human sources. They maintained relationships built over years, sometimes over decades, with foreign nationals positioned inside hostile intelligence structures, who provided real-time warnings about threats to American personnel abroad, American military infrastructure, and American political institutions at home. When you fire a CI-12 agent, you do not simply lose the agent. You lose every source they ever cultivated. You lose every relationship that agent spent years building, in environments where a single wrong signal means a source disappears forever. Those relationships do not transfer to the next hire. They do not survive in a classified file. They vanish because the sources trusted that specific individual, and now those individuals are gone. Intelligence professionals are not speaking in cautious hypotheticals about what this means for national security. They are speaking in catastrophic absolutes. One former senior counterintelligence official speaking to reporters late last night used a phrase that has now circulated through every national security briefing room in the capital city. We are functionally blind, not diminished, not weakened, blind. At the precise moment that American military assets are moving into positions that could trigger direct confrontation with Iranian-backed forces across multiple theaters, the Bureau's capacity to detect, intercept, or provide advanced warning against Iranian intelligence operations inside the United States has been dismantled by the person legally responsible for preventing exactly that outcome. And now Kash Patel is going to have to sit down in front of Congress and explain it under oath, on the record, in front of cameras, with documentation that investigators have already begun assembling and that his legal team has not yet seen in full. This is where it becomes a lethal trap, because Patel does not have a clean answer waiting for him in that hearing room. If he testifies that the firings were performance-based, Congress will demand the performance documentation, and those records, if they exist at all in the form he would need them to, will not explain why every single terminated agent shares the identical prior assignment history. The classified documents investigation at Mar-a-Lago. If he claims the firings were part of a structural reorganization, Congress will demand the reorganization plan. He signed, dated, and filed before the first termination notice was issued. And if that plan does not exist in that form, that answer transforms instantly into an admission. If he argues the timing was coincidental, he is asking the most powerful oversight bodies in the federal government to accept that the director of the FBI accidentally eliminated the country's entire Middle East counterintelligence capability 48 hours before a Middle East military escalation, without recognizing the convergence. That argument will not survive contact with the evidence. It will not survive contact with the timeline, and it will not survive contact with the one fact that no framing exercise can neutralize. Every agent fired shared one prior assignment, and that assignment pointed directly at the President of the United States. What makes the coming congressional hearing a potential endgame moment for Kash Patel is the documentary trail that investigators are already building around him. They do not simply have termination notices. They have the full personnel files. They have the assignment histories. They have the dates of every significant action in the classified documents investigation, cross-referenced against the dates of every termination order Patel signed. And what those cross-references reveal, according to multiple sources who have reviewed preliminary materials assembled by committee staff, is a sequencing pattern so precise and so consistent that describing it as coincidental would require a level of credulity that no federal investigator, no congressional examiner, and no federal prosecutor possesses. The agents with the deepest operational knowledge of the Mar-a-Lago document transfers were removed first. The agents with the most recent involvement in related grand jury proceedings were removed next. The agents identified in internal FBI records as potential future witnesses in any revived or expanded prosecution were removed last in sequence in order. That is not an administrative action. That is a target list executed with the full institutional authority of the FBI directorship. The political firestorm now erupting around Kash Patel has caught his allies inside the administration completely off guard. As recently as 72 hours ago, the dominant narrative around Patel within support of media circles was one of decisiveness. A reformer cutting bureaucratic resistance, a loyal director delivering on his mandate to reshape the FBI in the president's image. That narrative is now ash because the story is no longer about administrative reform or political loyalty. The story is now about whether the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation deliberately and knowingly compromised the national security of the United States in order to eliminate the witnesses most capable of providing testimony harmful to a federal investigation involving the president. That is the accusation. That is the question with subpoena power attached to it. And that is the question that, if answered incorrectly under oath, carries consequences that no executive privilege claim, no presidential pardon discussion, and no political protection apparatus can fully absorb. The walls are closing in on Kash Patel with a speed that his own legal team is struggling to match. The congressional investigation has teeth. It has cross-committee coordination. It has the active cooperation of intelligence community veterans who spent their careers staying silent about internal matters and have now concluded that silence is no longer an option. It has a timeline that works entirely against the director, because every hour that passes without a credible, documented explanation for why every single agent who ever investigated Mar-a-Lago was removed from the most sensitive Middle East counterintelligence unit in the Bureau before a Middle East war is another hour in which the only remaining explanation is the obvious one. Kash Patel did not simply fire employees. He targeted witnesses. He dismantled a shield. He left the country exposed to foreign threats at the worst possible moment. And he did it to protect someone. That is what the evidence suggests. That is what the timeline shows. And that is exactly what Congress is now building the documented, subpoenaed, on-the-record case to prove. Stay with this story, because what happens when Kash Patel sits down under oath and faces the questions that have no clean answers will determine whether this becomes the defining scandal of this administration, or the first domino in something that stretches far beyond one director, one purge, and one midnight firing list. The agents are gone. The intelligence networks they maintained are gone. But the documents, the dates, the names, the personnel files, and the testimony of every person who watched this happen, those are all still here. And they are all pointed without ambiguity directly at the director of the FBI. This is not the end of this story. This is the moment the story becomes impossible to set.